Hey guys, welcome back to Real Housewives Recaps. I'm so glad you're here. You guys, we are in this book and I'm excited to talk about it. So if you're just joining, we are reading this book, either book, it doesn't matter, same book. This is the fourth part of the recap, but we will be picking up on chapter 7 on this one. And I'm excited. This is my favorite chapter. This is the juiciest chapter. This is the second half of the chapter, and we're going to get into this. So much happening, mostly about how awful Harry and Meg are. We knew that, right? But let's get into this. I remember when we left off in the last part of the book, those two were accepting BS made up awards, Ripple of Hope Award, yeah, right, recognition for their work on, all that stuff. Total BS, right? But meanwhile, the author, Robert Hardman, did a great job of pointing out how Charles was bringing about actual waves of change, not hollow, empty things like Harry and Meghan. Remind me again what Archwell does? Yeah, that's what I thought. Anyway, so it's... Again, I'm just enjoying the heck out of this book. He writes so well. He talks about this was a really hard time for everybody. So Harry and Meghan was just about to drop the first 3 episodes. The second 3 would be not much long after. You guys, every time I bring this up, I think about watching that thing, that 6-part, what they call it a documentary. It was not that. It was just a 6-part wine fest. It was, I want those 6 hours back. Okay. So he goes on to explain the documentary. We've seen it, but I'll touch on some of the highlights that he says because he has a great way of explaining it. He calls the main villains of the piece were the British press, but how many withering remarks there were about the royal family and the monarchy. And recalls that Harry talked of the pain and suffering of women marrying into this institution because they always have to play victim. And remember, he took a big old jab at everybody and said something along the lines of, usually they marry someone that will fit the mold rather than who you're destined to be with. So it was basically about whether or not everybody around him had married for love, claiming to be the only one that did. How awful is that? It's not only the most selfish thing he could think to say, it's so hurtful, and obviously it was designed, in my opinion, it was designed to hurt. He was trying to hurt those around him. He was trying to hurt, in my opinion, especially William, Prince of Wales, and Catherine, Princess of Wales. And the author again goes on. I'm on page, let's see here, sorry. I'm on page 151 if you're trying to read along with me. But the author goes into how it seemed to be a blatant attack on Catherine. And at first he was wondering if it was just Harry shooting off at the mouth, but again, seems to land that it tends to be a blatant attack on Catherine, Princess of Wales, and how for William, this was the lowest of the low. So opinions, again, were divided. They were trying to figure out how calculated this was, if it was a calculated slight against Prince of Wales, or if it was a case of Harry shooting off his mouth. Can it be both? I think he's always attacking William and Catherine. Okay, so they go into, I love this author. He goes into calling this thoughtless allegations. But elsewhere in the story, Harry accused his family of a huge level of, say it together, unconscious bias. And then they go into Meghan and how she dismissed the original engagement interview. Do you remember this? That interview they did where they were like all weird. A lot of you say that you saw red flags there. I honestly didn't. I don't even remember watching this interview until I got invested in this whole thing. Yeah, I get it. Red flags everywhere. Yeesh. I covered it on Patreon. All right. So Meghan went on to dismiss this interview as, quote, rehearsed and an orchestrated reality show. And I'd say, what has everything been that you guys have ever done, talking about Harry and Meghan, but a rehearsed, orchestrated, I wouldn't even call it a reality show. I know those things are usually like pre-planned. Sorry to burst the bubble. But what the heck? Think about Harry and Meghan's last appearance at Invictus, where they were pretending to play the part of being in love. And it was the most over-the-top, orchestrated, rehearsed thing I think I've seen. I honestly couldn't stop laughing. And then to top it all off, remember she marched in front of actual servicemen and women. Awful, awful people. All right, let's keep going. Lest we never forget, right? So this came as something a surprise, her, again, referring to it as an orchestrated reality show, to the BBC, who conducted this. As one of its most experienced and highly regarded journalists, the one that did the interview felt that she had conducted herself in a thoroughly professional interview. She coolly restricted her response to the words of the late Queen. Can we say this one together? Recollections may vary. I love it. I didn't realize that the person who conducted the interview spoke out with recollections may vary. Love that and love her. They don't do anything. Well, I could just end that sentence there. They don't do anything. They don't do anything to make themselves likable, do they? As I'm recording this, I just came off of recording, again, I don't know when this will go up. It'll probably be a week later, but the Jane Goodall of it all, where we just found out that Harry had kind of snapped at Jane Goodall when she was a guest in their house and was being interviewed and got to hold baby Archie, and he was kind of a dick to her, right? And then being a dick to Travolta at the Faux Awards aviation show. I mean, he's a miserable prick, isn't he? Sheesh, let's move on. So 4 days later, the trailer for the second part of this awfulness landed with more of the same. I wasn't being thrown to the wolves. I was being fed to the wolves. She's not sure what she's saying, said Meghan. And then remember, we got they were happy. I wish Jay was here. He's not here to record the voice. They were happy to lie to protect my brother, said Harry. So the last 3 episodes came out. Yeah, it's just more of the awfulness. It just brings it all back for me. He then goes into the relocation to California and how Harry referred to it as a freedom and a audacious escape, that sort of thing. Again, Robert Hardman, who is now a member of the Drunk Goose Club, because I like the way he writes, says this wasn't so much a documentary series, but a curated self-portrait. I thought that was a nice way of saying, yeah, they're full of themselves. They couldn't stop making it about themselves and making themselves victims. But I might be putting words in his mouth. So then he points out the prominent credit in the title sequence of their own production company, Archwell. Shocker, right? Again, what has Archwell done? Oh, wait. Okay, so from here, we go into... He talks about, the 6th episode comes out and what happens to everybody because of this. Their already existing fans hug them closer still. The critics groaned more and the neutrals remained neutral. So the author goes on to say it was 6 hours of first world whinging. Then he goes into the most cantankerous of the moments. Oh, you guys, we all get very heated over this. But when the smirking Meghan performed a comic repeat of her first curtsy to the Queen. Those are the author's words. I would not call it comic, but I get what he's saying. The queasy look of discomfort on Harry's face was that of a man all too aware of the consequences, yet unable to do anything about it. Ooh, that's a good way to describe him. Social media once again lit up with the criticism not confined to the usual suspects. Yet again, the king and the family said nothing. So he refers to this a lot, their dignified silence, and how Harry and Meghan should have taken a cue from that, but did not. Again, I mean, this is obvious, but I just go, I can't help but think, of course, they know this. They know that the palace won't speak out. They weaponize this, Harry and Meghan do. So they say all these things. They can throw out anything that is their truth. I'm sorry. Every time I say their truth, I laugh because they do not know the truth. And there is no such thing as their truth. It's either true or not true, but they wouldn't understand that. Talking about Harry and Meghan. But again, it goes into the silence on the part of the royal family. Meanwhile, during all this time and while this was going on, King Charles had his first Christmas broadcast of his reign. He chose St. George's Chapel in Windsor, one of my favorite places in the world. I love that place. I've been in there. It's wonderful. It happened at 3 p.m. On 25th of December. I want to talk about, we're still in chapter 7, page 155, because this came one of my favorite lines of the book. And I don't mean that, well, there are a lot of great lines, especially when calling out Harry and Meghan, but I just thought this was really cool. So the author is explaining the royal family and how that works. And well, you'll see what I'm saying. I don't have to explain this to my UK friends, but as an American here, it just kind of was interesting and it hit home. I had always heard that the Queen wanted to be a calming force. The way the author describes it, he calls it dwelling on the inspirational power of everlasting light in a dark world. I thought that was so well said. It bears repeating. Here we go. Dwelling on the inspirational power of everlasting light in a dark world. Cool. Wonderful. Where's that for us? That's why I latch on so hard to the royal family. I think that's a great way to explain that. And it's just, again, a calming force. I found that so interesting and so well said. It just kind of summed things up, I think, for a lot of us. And for, again, it's a good way to explain it to somebody like myself who did not grow up with a royal family, but who has adopted yours. All right, let's keep going. So, God, I hate to switch gears, but back to Dumb and Dumberton. Prince Harry had agreed to do these interviews for the book. Now, remember, this book was coming out. All of a sudden, pages started leaking, and we'll get into the leak, but pages started leaking, right? And so people kind of knew what was going to happen with this book. It was going to be a wine fest, his version of a tell-all. I don't think he knows how to tell anything. But it was just remember the preparation for this. And I do remember Meghan had disappeared at this point and kind of left him to do these promotional things. And I find that very funny because, I think he was kind of the laughing stock on a lot of this stuff. But they put out trailers for the Anderson Cooper of it all. And the author says that the clip appeared to be more like a Netflix rerun as Harry lobbed the same charge of media / palace collusion into the mix. Silence is betrayal were his words. Again, I'd like to point out, I actually tweeted this out when the Parks news broke. I'm sorry, Harry, didn't you say silence is betrayal when you say your silence? Again, I don't know if it's come out, if he said anything since I've recorded this, but at the time of this recording, it's been days since the news broke and we haven't heard anything from him. Silence is betrayal, Harry. But it's interesting. He likes to use things like this to play victim, but to actually maybe make a change or try to help in some way, can't do it. All right. So continuing on, I can't with this. You guys, he just sucks so bad. They both do. All right. And we'll get into why Meghan sucks, but right now it's on why Harry sucks so bad. So they're putting out all this press. And then the author says a day later, Tom Bradby's ITV tried to take a different tact and put out a trailer that it was more of they tried to go positive with it. And they had the soundbite of Harry saying, "I'd like my father back. I'd like my brother back." But then 3 days later, ITV released another trailer and they asked Harry, "Hey, you want to attend the King's coronation, a big deal for your dad?" And his response, "The door is always open. The ball's in their court." So he's just trying to goad them into a response and trying to put it on them. And again, take no accountability whatsoever. Harry really is sickening. They both are. So then continuing on, it was January 5th when The Guardian obtained a chunk of the text. And then also remember that Spain decided to put a few copies on sale early so that regular customers could buy them as epiphany gifts. So this is where it gets funny. We all suspected that it was released early for a frenzy, for the news, for the media, to talk about this book, right? Well, the author, Robert Hardman, here goes in and says, well, you didn't think this out very much. And, the Sussexes, I don't use their title, but in this case, it's kind of funny, so go with me. The Sussexes' sworn enemy, the British tabloid press, could have possibly paid like a 7-figure sum for exclusive glimpse, even a day before the publication, right? But instead, the dum-dums, whoever leaked it, right, I have to say, we don't know who it was, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we know. So because dum-dums had the idea to leak this early because they think they know best on everything, well, these people that would have paid up to 7-figure sums, allegedly, I think that might be a little steep, but whatever, I see where he's going. Because they decided to jump the gun early. The people that would have paid that were holding a copy of the whole book and had only paid a few euros for it. So joke's on you, idiots. So he explains the teams of Spanish translator that were working against the clock to try to go chapter by chapter and get this content out. And then Robert Hardman again goes into how this is possibly the most candid and caustic royal memoir ever written. And he goes into the sensational claims, talking about how Prince William had physically attacked his younger brother, allegedly, and that argument and the necklace break, that sort of thing. He goes into a ridiculousness that Harry would release private conversations that he was having. And again, I say allegedly on that, not to protect Harry, but because I don't believe most of the things Harry put in his book. But conversations that were claimed by Harry, and his terribly ill-judged decision to wear that uniform, and how Harry tried to claim it was not his fault, and all the substances Harry got into, that sort of thing. There were intimate revelations. We know, we read the book. I cannot go back over that, but you know what I'm saying. The revelations about his loss of virginity, his frostbitten, you know what, I had to use mommy's face cream. Just everything, all the stuff that Harry had written, right? Well, he talked about how, in the author's opinion, no one could have been dreading this book more than Queen Camilla. And then he brings up how Harry had recalled his fears ahead of meeting her for the first time, and if she'd be all the wicked stepmothers in the storybooks. And remember, he's doing this on purpose. He's likening her to the wicked stepmother because he likes to hurt people with his words. He and Meghan, they like to hurt people that can't fire back. Again, see Catherine, Princess of Wales for details. Then the author goes into how ridiculous it is that Harry continued to repeatedly accuse Queen Camilla, of conducting her own PR campaign at the expense of the young princes. And remember, he talked about how things could have only been leaked by, and he goes into talking about Harry in his book accused Camilla of leaking things. Well, the author goes in to explain what we had heard before. No, that's not what happened. That at the time when it came out, Camilla was absolutely. Let me back up so you understand what the hell I'm talking about. I know a lot of you know, but in case you don't, all right. It was July 1998 when this piece came out. It was fully documenting their first encounter. Camilla when she met William and Harry. So Harry is accusing Camilla of leaking this information. It was talked about in another book we read. I just can't remember which one. It doesn't matter. That Camilla was mortified when this came out, and that she immediately turned around and launched an internal investigation. The one person whom she had told about her experience with meeting Harry and William was her personal assistant, Amanda McManus, keeper of her diary. Well, McManus, turns out, told her husband James worked for a newspaper and confided in an ex-colleague. So you get where it's going. So it ends up being printed. Well, Amanda ended up issuing a public apology and immediately resigned. So it sucks. And I'm not saying it's right what happened, but I am saying it doesn't sound like it was Camilla's fault. The author himself on page 158, one of my other favorite lines, he calls it, quote, a pure cock-up. A pure cock-up. So a quarter of a century later, the new queen, Camilla, and her staff made no comment on this because they've all moved on. Naturally, the world wanted to hear Prince William's thoughts since Harry's leaking out all this information. But the author of this book says he was assured by people surrounding Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, that neither of them read it. It was a senior advisor who says this. He's a grown-up 40-year-old about William with the BBC app on his phone, so he knows what this book says. And the senior advisor goes on to say that he knows people like me will tell him, not me, but the senior advisor. I wish I could tell him stuff. I'd say, you're doing great. I love your wife. Now strip your titles from your brother. Okay, bye. That's what I would say. Okay, anyway, back to the story. So basically, no, he has not read the book. He doesn't need to. He's read News Highlights, I'm sure, and he has people around him that can tell him the low points of what's being said. And they claim the same with the Netflix series. And that there's so many people were urging Prince William to respond to some of those other two charges. And he decided to remain silent on it. All right, so continuing on, we're on page 158 if you're following along. So throughout the book, Harry was keen to stress this devotion toward Her Majesty the late Queen and Prince Philip. Reflecting on her grandmother after his passing, he wrote special relationship. That's what they said about us. Okay, again, I don't mean to keep bringing up this Jane Goodall thing, but let me remind you that allegedly when Dr. Jane Goodall came to visit Harry when he was doing the interview, held baby Archie, she referenced his grandmother. This was in 2019. So they were still with the royal family, and God, now I forget the exact quote, but Harry was a dick to her and basically said, she said something like, oh, he'll have to learn the royal wave, just like Her Majesty the Queen, something like that. And Harry's like, no, he will not be living his life. Something like, he will not be growing up like that. I'm sorry, Doofus, didn't you and Duchess Doofus insist on titles for your kids? And now you're going to pull this crap? Really? Not even now. Back then, you were pulling this crap, and yet you threw a fit publicly, several in fact, about the titles for your children. You accuse people of horrible things like holding out titles based on colors and stuff that wasn't actually happening. Blatant lies. And yet, again, okay. All right, let's keep going. My head's going to explode. I smell burnt toast. And let me show you the brilliance of Robert Hardman. Here we go. Okay. So he's explaining how Harry's hanging on this special relationship with Her Majesty the late Queen. And let me be clear. I love Her Majesty the late Queen. I am not mocking her. I'm mocking her idiot grandson. All right. So the special relationship, right? Well, Hardman goes on to say, well, now that's interesting. So he's clinging on to his special relationship with the Queen. And yet, he sure didn't mind attacking some of her staff. And then Hardman apparently talked to them, and it says they wouldn't respond, but they were interested by what had been omitted from the book. So one privately recalled that the Queen had been, quote, as angry as I'd ever seen her in 2021 after those two, and we know where we're going with this, that baby name. They announced that the Queen had given her blessing with that baby name. We know it's full of shit, right? We've talked about that, but oh God, seeing it in print. And so this is the brilliance of this author. That's where I'm trying to go with this. Sorry, it's kind of a murky way to get there. But do you see what he did there? So he's like, oh, okay, Harry. So interesting. You talk about your special relationship with the Queen. You bash her staff. And then the author talks to the staff and then finds a way to say, no, since you bashed her staff, they'd like to tell you that the Queen's been as angry as I'd ever seen her. And again, talking about the call with the name. And the way he's saying it is allegedly they didn't have permission to the name. Why am I saying it like that? I don't think they had permission either, but they like to sue everybody, so I'm covering my bases here. Go with me on this. Again, they fired off legal actions against anyone who dared suggest that they were not telling the full truth, right? When have we ever known them to lie? That's just not a thing. But however, those two tried to co-opt the palace into propping up their version of events. Guess what? They were rebuffed. Once again, it was a case of recollections may vary. Interesting how everybody else has similar stories, but Harry and Meghan cannot keep their story straight. But I like how everybody's telling them recollections may vary. Those noisy threats of legal actions seem to evaporate for some reason, and the libel action against the BBC was never materialized. So the author wraps up this chapter by one of my other favorite lines from this book. that says the nation's formerly favorite cheeky chappie has turned into a rather pathetic middle-aged man. Shall we read that again? That's good. So the nation's former favorite cheeky chappie has turned into a rather pathetic middle-aged man. I would like to make sure Harry sees that. Finally, the author is very clear to point out, hey, all that crap they said didn't really have an effect. He goes into the opinion polls. Sure enough, they showed barely any variation in the king's approval ratings from the start of these, quote, headwinds to the end. They remained a few points down on his post-accession high, but still firmly at the similar mark that it had been. So then the author says that, as the queen herself liked to say in times of adversity, this too shall pass. And it had. So that's it for the chapter. We will pick up with chapter 8 in the next part. I sure am enjoying this book, and I hope you are too. Thanks so much for being here with me and listening along. I really want to know your comments on this one. I want to know your thoughts. And I can't wait to bring you more stuff like this. Take care. Bye-bye.